Okay, Genesis chapter 1. I know it seems like we're never going to finish it. And if we never did, that'd be fine with me. Hi, Tom.
Good morning.
You got chased out of your seat.
That's all right.
Is that one good and warm for you?
It's fine.
All right.
You want me someplace else?
No, you don't have to move.
I'd be happy to go over there by back and just.
There's a room with a lot of porcelain over there.
Is that where you want me, Ryan? I go over there.
I mean, we do have the Zoom feed, so you could if you wanted to. but-
See, you get your nap during the service. Maybe I ought to get my nap before the
There you
service.
go. Better, I wouldn't sleep so much.
There we go. Well, you know the rules about sleeping in church?
What?
When I start to preach, you have to be awake. If I put you to sleep, you deserve the nap.
All right.
But if you're napping, I may come down and tap on your shoulder.
Well, I've had that happen.
Sorry, Gary.
That's all right. Here we are in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. I agree with Brian. It's like he was here before. These are the most, it's easy to use superlatives. Oh, this is the most important verse. That's the most important verse. John 3:16 is the most important verse. God so loved the world. For by grace you have been saved through faith. That's the most important verse. Well, if I had to pick a most important verse, it's right here. These are the most important 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 words. 10 words in the Bible, in which we have a solid foundation for faith. And if you try to build your faith on anything else or your worship, you will go awry. And so I'm going with Genesis chapter 1, verse 1.
I would even take it smaller than that. The first phrase, in the beginning, God.
It implies actually the rest of the words. Yeah. Yep. In this verse, God is identified, the God of the Israelites is identified as the creator. And in being identified as the creator, he is identified as king. And he is to be worshiped and served by all of his creatures, all of the time, uniquely and exclusively. And he's very, very jealous in that regard. I was looking at, I was just kind of looking around at ancient idolatry. The Romans, here we are back to Rome. Arnold, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? Tom, how often do you think about the Roman
Not
Empire?
often.
Every day.
No.
Did you hear about this? There's a meme going around on the internet. Wives are finding out how much they're asking their husbands, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? And they're shocked to find out how often men think about the Roman Empire. And the husbands are saying, oh, every day. Why? Well, don't you see the architecture on the road, the columns and the arches and stuff? How can you not think about the Roman Empire? It's just like the Roman Empire. But anyway, the Romans had an ongoing feud with the Carthaginians. Carthage should bring to mind, probably not. Let's see. I need a map of the ancient. Where's the road system one? Here. The perennial competitors in the Mediterranean Sea were Rome and Carthage, which Carthage is not on here. Carthage is right here. You just don't see it that way. So here's Rome. Oh, I got it wrong. I'm sorry. Carthage is right here. Here's Carthage. Here's Rome. And they competed over control of the Mediterranean basin. And it ended up resulting in this most famous military battle in history. When the old Hannibal has crossed the Alps is to this day like the die is cast, which was Rome, which was Caesar. The die is cast when he crossed the Rubicon into basically his invasion of Rome, his home city. But Hannibal has crossed the Alps, which means Hannibal has come around to attack Rome, and he's going to go on this rampage through Italy, and the Romans are not going to know what to do with him because they can't defeat him, and he just rampages across Italy for 10 years. But anyway, so they were perennial opponents and enemies, fierce enemies. And finally, Rome they said, we defeated Carthage in the last battle after the thing with Hannibal. The only way they got Hannibal out of their country was they said, well, let's go attack Carthage. That'll make him leave Italy. Sure enough, they attacked Carthage, and he had to get out of Italy to come down and protect Carthage. And he got defeated by one of the guys who was in the final climactic battle back in Italy when Hannibal destroyed, I don't know how many legions. He survived that and he ended up defeating Hannibal back at Carthage. And then they destroyed Carthage to some extent. And they didn't completely destroy it. So 60 years later or something, they said, you know, we're not going to leave Carthage to come back. We're going to go destroy Carthage. So they completely wiped out Carthage, and it resulted in that famous saying, let's salt the earth so that nothing can ever grow there again. That was Rome on Carthage. Anyway, part of the reason that they hated the Carthaginians was their practice of human sacrifice, specifically infant sacrifice. They were Phoenicians. Carthaginians were Phoenicians. And Phoenicians across the whole thing, including over here, because probably, and here, this was Phoenician territory, right here, Tyre and Sidon and so forth, and probably also the Philistines, probably Phoenicians, practitioners of infant idolatry, of human sacrifice and infant sacrifice. And so they abhorred the Carthaginians for a bunch of reasons, one of which was their practice of human sacrifice. So when they destroyed the Carthaginians in this ruthless extermination in the 100s BC, they wiped out essentially human sacrifice in the Mediterranean basin. Whatever you think of the Romans, that was the result of it. It all but ended. But anyway, it was all the way. It was all the way. It extended from Carthage. I don't know about in between, but it got into the Canaanite cultures. And so they've done these digs. I don't know if it was just the Phoenicians that this came from, but they've done these digs where they've uncovered in what we call now Israel, of these temples, these Canaanite temples where they practiced their idolatry. And there's this ongoing debate, like, for example, this is the one at Tel Gezer, which I think just means city. Tel? Does it mean city? City of or something? I don't remember. But anyway, and so in this case, there's a big debate about, was this the place where they actually performed the human sacrifice? And then they put the body or whatever, they burned the body in here, inside this hole, because they've uncovered all these burned up bodies of infants, of kids, with their heads cut off. And so there's this ongoing debate about, did they burn them after they were dead or before they were dead? I mean, it wouldn't matter if it was a human sacrifice, it's a human sacrifice. But this was going on in the Canaanite cultures that Israel was now living in the midst of. And so you get some insight into why God said, you know, why would he order them to exterminate all the Canaanites? Well, once you understand something of what these people were like, you know, there's that statement in Genesis chapter 15, the covenant chapter, the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete. We think they're what? What are they doing that's so, you know, so, well, right here, it was abhorrent. And so they were supposed to exterminate these peoples, and they didn't. And the result was that it infected Israelite culture to the point where Solomon himself also engaged in human sacrifice with these, have I got that right? With, to the god of Moloch. You know, now Solomon loved many foreign women, and he married these women in these treaties and stuff, and they brought their practices in from their cultures. Not that it was the women doing it, but it was their cultures. And so he began to participate in this stuff. And so Israel goes through another round of judgment, and it will end up being completely consumed by idolatry. There's about 20 kings in the north and south over the course of the next, the 250, 300 years after the division of the empire when Solomon died. There is not a single king in the north in Israel who is called good. Every single one of them has the moniker, he did evil in the sight of the Lord. And there's only 6 in the south. Asa, you know, you have Asa, Josiah, Hezekiah, you have a few. But other than those 6, you know, there's 13, 14 of them that got the same thing. He did evil. And this is part of the evil. They let this stuff hang around, and then they began to participate in it. So that's the trade-off. You don't want to exterminate them? Okay, then this is where you're going to end up, and then I'm going to judge you, and I'm going to drive you from the land, because if I want human sacrifice and I want idolatry, well, I already had that there. I already had the Canaanites there. Why would I need to bring you in to practice that stuff too? So get out. And so they got They got driven from the land in 722 BC, northern side, and 586 BC, the southern side, and that was it. But anyway, this is the sort of thing that Genesis chapter 1 has in mind. An idol is nothing. How do you know an idol is nothing? Answer, because there is only one creator. The only God is the creator. All other gods are vain, are nothing.
There are no other gods.
There are no other gods. They're names given to a piece of wood or a stone or, a hunk of gold or something molded into something. That's the nature of idolatry. And that was their big war. The big war, so the big challenge associated with Genesis chapter 1 that it was meant to address was, how are we going to take this people that was steeped in idolatry, this idolatrous people that came out of Egypt and practiced that idolatry? How are we going to keep them from doing the same thing when they get to Canaan, in a place where arguably the idolatry is much worse because of the factor of human sacrifice? Genesis chapter 1 is the beginning of that retraining of the very idea of God. And I think that's still true today. When you start a conversation, what's the difference between starting a conversation with, in the beginning, there was a single cell in a warm ocean in a reducing atmosphere. And then the single cell, then stuff happened. And then there was life. There was another form of life. What's the difference between starting your worldview on that notion and in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth?
With accountability.
Exactly.
Everything changes. Those two worlds are so far apart. Everything you build on top of those foundations is different. That's the difference. And that's Israel, only it wasn't evolutionary thinking that they had a problem, that they were having a problem with. It was idolatrous thinking. Everything was a god that needed to be sacrificed to and manipulated and appeased and so forth. That's how you end up with human sacrifice. These gods need to be appeased. And it's been a bad year for the crops. And we're all going to starve to death again. So you get more and more desperate till you end up doing stuff like this. Well, this stuff is all over the world. So that's ancient Canaan. I was kind of looking into the Aztec Empire. We talk about Rome with Carthage, who were Phoenicians, and then we talk about Canaan. This is on our side of the world. This is the Aztec Empire. A bunch of years ago in the 90s, I went to, there's a museum in, was it Denver? I don't remember, probably Denver, where there was an exhibit on the Aztecs. And I still remember being blown away by the presentation at that time of their practice of human sacrifice. It was extraordinary. Whole temples, exotic temples, dedicated, this is Mayor, dedicated, which they've uncovered. Here's the remains. Which which were dedicated to the practice of human sacrifice. And you cut the person open, you rip out the beating heart, you do whatever you do, and then you move on to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And eventually somewhere in there, maybe the god gets appeased, or you get what, you think you get what you want. But this is the same. This is the Aztecs. This is the story about Cortez. When he came to when he landed, he came to the Aztecs, and they were floored by this practice. They couldn't believe it. They're Westerners. Westerners come from this sort of Roman tradition, I assume, and there's a different mindset about things like human sacrifice. And so it was so bad that for hundreds of years, scholars didn't really believe it could have been as bad as it was. And they finally uncovered evidence of it. The skulls are still there, what does it say, with bored holes on either side to allow the skulls to slide into wooden poles. That's these Spanish people describing it, and they say, oh, that can't be. Well, they uncovered evidence that it be, and it was pretty nasty.
An interesting difference between the Aztecs and the Jews was that the Aztecs sacrificed to their God. Our God sacrificed for us.
Yes.
Jews did.
Yeah, it's not a,
Jews.
it's not a condom, it's a bastardization of the idea of sacrifice.
Yeah.
It's an inversion of it. It's a taking something that God mandated and twisting it into this grotesque thing. So we're gonna see sacrifice almost right away with Cain and Abel, right? Chapter 3. It's just there. 4, chapter 4. Which chapter is the Cain and Abel chapter? I forgot now. I think it's 4.
That's for.
But it doesn't explain where sacrifice, the institution of sacrifice came from. It's simply there. It's simply presented in chapter 3, right at the beginning of 4. It's sacrifice is a thing, but never humans. And then probably after Babel, I don't know, chapter 10. It's just everything goes awry. At that point, we'll get to all that, but it ends up, everybody spreads, and what spreads with it is this twisted version of worship that humans eventually engaged in as they leave behind the Creator in their thinking. So that's that. Why did I have 19 open? Oh yeah, we'll get back to the regeneration. We had a discussion last week about the conscience, and I was looking up some things, and the word that came to mind was regeneration. How is it that people go from, we were talking about, the sort of psychopathic mentality of someone who's been a murderer, and now they're going to be a believer? What has to change in their wiring? How do you go from being a murderer to a believer? And what does God do? And the word that came to mind was regeneration. So I pulled up Titus 3 and Matthew 19, which maybe we'll get back to. But anyway, back to Genesis chapter 1.
I think an interesting area that Genesis, the Pentateuch, written by Moses. And when you look at what Moses was combating in Egypt, all of the plagues were against the gods
Yes.
of Egypt.
Yep.
Now, it's real easy for us to become appalled at human sacrifice. That's almost the far end of idolatry. And not recognize that, as you said earlier, bad crops, you worship the god of harvest. Nile, you worship the god of the water.
So what comes out of what happens to the water? It turns to blood.
But that was the context here of Genesis within Moses's writing. And we see that idolatry. And I think it begs the question, what idols do we have in our lives?
Nothing that we think of as idols. We're too modern for that kind of thinking that primitive people engaged in.
Well, think on that. It's part of the message.
Oh, are you going to talk about that? Cool.
To tell the truth, there's only 2 gods in this world. God and man. Because man will make himself a god or make gods that pleasure him, gods that do what he wants to do as opposed to God being in charge.
Well,
Yeah.
Scripture does talk, Ryan, about the God of this age.
Yes,
Satan
he does call him the God of this age. Yeah.
does. And I think we need to make the distinction between God, capital G, the sovereign creator God, and God's little g. That
And the
are,
only reason they're gods though is because we made them.
because we design idols, correct?
There you go. That's what I'm talking
Correct.
about.
There's
Sacrifice doesn't please God, it pleases man. Quite often in these temples, there was, sexual things, prostitution going on, which they sacrificed to their God. They would sacrifice, all these things are just to make us feel good, to make us happy. It has nothing to do with it.
in fact, you could say that their idolatry was actually more practical.
Mhm.
Ours is self-flattering.
Mhm.
Theirs was we had a famine last year. I wonder, and we noticed that we associate the famine with the lack of rain. Well, the God of the rain, it must be angry. We have to do something to have him do his thing so that we can have fertile crops, or we're going to starve to death. And so they practice these rituals in the temple, you know, the cults in the temple, they're called fertility cults, where these because then by engaging in these rituals, you entice the gods to do the same thing. In this case, be fruitful, and the result would be, and then it rains. So you associate the two, and you say, "Oh, that worked." So you do it. Then you do it on an ongoing basis to keep him appeased. But it's a ritualistic manipulation of the gods, where the act in and of itself has the power. By virtue of performing the act, without your attitude about it mattering at all, what matters is performing the ritual. And then by performing the ritual, you could manipulate the behavior of the gods. All of that is out of the window with the God, the creator. Our Lord is in the heavens. Don't try that on him. You cannot manipulate him. He does whatever he pleases. That's a psalm. That's the point. He cannot be manipulated by the behavior of man, the rituals of man, or anything else. As far as Brian's point about we are the God, yes, that in a sense, that's the prevailing wisdom of our age, even though nobody says it. Actually, some people do say it that way. There's this view among humans, this quaint view among humans in our day, that they're autonomous individuals, in sovereign control of their own destiny. And I think that accounts partly for the veneration of abortion is more than just an act, more than just the act itself. It's more than what it accomplishes. The ridding itself, the ridding somebody of something. It's practically ritual. It's a ritual. It is the founding ritual of a mindset of autonomy and sovereign control. And when it is practiced, I mean, it's practically an act of human sacrifice. In that sense. Yeah, practically functions that way. But there's a statement that came out of the Enlightenment, which was the 1500s, post-Renaissance. We're talking Descartes, Newton, although Newton was a believer. Martin Luther, everything that happened between, let's say, the 1500s to the 1700s, something like that. The idea, this autonomy and sovereign individual and individualism. And what comes out of that is the phrase, "the man is the measure of all things." And that's just simply false. But there's your statement of deity, of the deifying of the human condition. Man is the measure of all things. And he is certainly not. And events like what occurred between 1939 and 1945 of the last century bear that out. The bloody century. Bloody post-Enlightenment century, and not just in Germany. The numbers are staggering, 40 to 60 million in the East, in the Soviet Union under Stalin. Mao Zedong in China, the Cultural Revolution and the Great Leap Forward, another 20, 30. The numbers are staggering. Pol Pot in Cambodia, killing some high percent, a third of his own people. The numbers were smaller, but then it's a population of 3 or 4 million. So there's there's what the autonomous individual brings you. Death on that scale. It took post-Enlightenment modernity to produce death on that scale. The Romans never produced death on that scale, but we did, post-Enlightenment. As far as the gods of the Egyptians that Tom was just referring to, he talked about the god of the Nile. I forget his name. They had a god for everybody. And of course, the supreme one in their mind was Amun-Ra, the sun god. And so now you look at this plague right here. Now you believe the sun god, he shines over you all day long. And he rules your nation, Egypt. Day after day, year after year, century after century, and it gets passed down. And all of a sudden, this slave people, this man walks in. And in the name of this slave people, that you really do kind of a bore because of their own practices with regard to sheep herding and so forth and other things. In the name of this slave people, in the name of this God of a slave people, their leader makes a statement, and suddenly the great supreme sun god, Amun-Ra, is wiped out. He just disappears and the whole earth goes dark. And you absolutely panic at the prospect of facing this God who can just wipe out the great Ra anytime he wants. And before it is all over, there will not be an exodus, there will be an expulsion. As the Israelites are driven from Egypt, as fast as the Egyptians can get them out of there, they'll give them anything they want to get them out of there. So when you celebrate the Passover, do it to recall to mind what happened. You're going to be dressed, staff in hand, and you're going to eat it quickly, unleavened bread, eat it quickly, so you can recreate the circumstances by which you were driven from Egypt into the desert, because hopefully if we get this people out into the desert, they can sacrifice to their angry God out in the desert, and the God will leave us alone and we'll be rid of him. That's the way these people thought.
So we can go back and worship these weaker gods.
We could, or you just worship yourself. You continue to,
Well, that's what all other worship is worship man.
you nurture this notion of sovereignty. Sovereignty is the great myth of our time. That we have it. And then the minute it's broken because of events in the world, you get unnerved, you get insecure, you get rattled back into reality. Well, maybe I don't have so much sovereignty as I thought I did. My sister's in the process of having her driver's license taken away because of a diagnosis recently. And she's finding out how closely she associated that car with her own independence and sovereignty, and all based on a car, mobility. And now that's taken away, and its life is shattered. And I'd be the same way, I mean, or something like that.
The foundation of Egypt and worshiping their gods was yanked out from under them, and they are left with nowhere to go.
The Egyptians?
Yeah, in Egypt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now this,
Everything.
now they chase these people, they change their mind, they go back to their way of thinking. Wait a minute, what have we done? Our God is greater than that. The sun is back. There he is. So they chase this people across the desert. And right in front of them, the water opens up with this magnificent display of power. Somebody's worshiping that water as a god over there, one side or the other, you know. But the water is just moved out of the way, and this people walks through it on dry land. And then you, in a moment of delusion, you don't think, I'm not walking down there. That God will just destroy us. All he has to do is bring the water back. You just decide you're going to walk through, and the next thing you know, you perish in this judgment by this God. You can call it in the sea, but really it's a judgment by God. In their world, it's a judgment by God. That's what the crossing was. All right, that's what they're up against. And that's what this verse is about. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Let's see if I can move us along. See if I can move me along. I mean, you don't get tired of it. It's just, you'll never finish it. It's 50 chapters long. We talked about that one. I just cataloged some of the prolific reminders in the Old Testament and New.
Psalms asks, what do you do when the foundations are removed? Psalms asks that, and that's what's happening in Egypt this time. That you're talking about.
Yep. It's like a great earthquake in the spiritual realm. This is Paul in Athens. Athens was the the great city of the Greek Empire, lots of gods, lots of idolatry. It's temple after temple. A friend of mine just went there. My boss just went there. And he got to go to the Acropolis, this magnificent temple complex. And that sits up on a hill, still overlooking Athens. And when it's lit up at night, it's absolutely extraordinary. And I just can't imagine what it'd be like to live, you know, it'd be double-sided, right? You're living you're sitting out on your porch because there's the houses down below in the evening, and you can look up at this temple. And on the one hand, this magnificent historical monument of your own civilization and its greatness on display, but on the other, just the utter foolishness that it's based in idolatry, this idolatrous mindset. Anyway, Paul's there. He sees the idols. What comes to his mind? Men of Athens, I observe that you are very religious in all respects. For while I was passing through and examining the objects of your worship, I found an altar with this inscription: to an unknown God. Therefore, what you worship in ignorance, and who are they worshiping in ignorance? Who are they worshiping? Do it in one word.
Man.
How about creator in ignorance? Well, you worship in ignorance. Now they're doing that in reality, right? That's what they're doing in reality. His unknown God thing, in case there's any other God out there, we worship him too. Well, it just so happens the one God that is unknown, that they're not worshiping, they're worshiping hundreds of gods. They got household idols, they got all this stuff, hundreds of gods. The one God that they failed to worship was the creator. How do you overlook that, right? So he says it to them. What you worship in ignorance, I proclaim to you, the God who made the world and all things in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth. And by doing that, he what's the opposite of elevating? Deprecates, degrades every other God before this God who is in the heavens as creator. Does not dwell in temples made with hands. He dwells in the heaven. Our Lord is in the heavens, as the Psalm says. Nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything. This God, you can't ritualistically entice into doing anything. You can't manipulate in any way. There's no ritual that you can perform to satiate him or even move him, because he has no needs. He is entirely self-satisfied. Since he himself, he's a giver of things, not a receiver of things. Since he himself gives to all people life and breath and all things. That's the nature of the creator, the one God, that they somehow managed to fail to worship. How's that for a mindset of foolishness? By one of the most innovative, creative, intelligent peoples that ever lived, the ancient Greeks of the period of Alexander the Great and just before. You're talking Plato, Aristotle, Socrates. I mean, it's Archimedes. Archimedes. I mean, the names are one after another. Anybody who thinks we're smarter than they were, if anything, it's exactly the opposite. I mean, these people were unbelievable, except in the religious realm, where no matter the more they tried, the more they missed the mark. The mark being to worship and serve the creator instead of the creature. So that's Paul, the same guy who wrote Romans chapter 1, which we talked about last week. John chapter 1. Now we're talking about a Palestinian, a Hebrew Jew, Hebraic Jew. Palestinian would be anachronistic. Hebraic Jew, a Jew of Judea in the 1st century AD, who never went to Athens or any place else like that. He came from the Mosaic traditions. And he wrote this when he wants to introduce Jesus. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the very beginning. Through him, all things came into existence, and without him, there was nothing. I forget which translation I used for that. That's not New American Standard. The starting point in John for understanding the Messiah, the King of Kings, the Lord, is his place over all things as creator. He was there at the beginning. Prior to the beginning of everything, he was there. So there's Hebrew tradition making its way into the New Testament. Colossians chapter 2,
Sorry, Gary.
yeah,
You go to verse 3 of that.
uh,
You had 1 and 2.
in him was life, life was the light of men.
1, 3.
All things came into being, that's, you're talking about 4 or
Verse
5?
3, all things came into being.
All things came into being through him.
Apart from him,
Nothing came into
came into
being,
being.
yeah. This is Don Gomason's thing about there's the things that were and the things that, how does he say that? He say it over and over. The distinction in the grammar here, they've translated this correctly. Were, you could also say were or was. All thing, apart from him, nothing was that was, or something like that. But
King James, nothing that was made.
was made, yes, yes. It's awkward sounding, but it makes the point. In him was life. He walks through all of the creative elements of chapter 1 of Genesis. The light shines in the darkness. Genesis 1, chapter 1, verse 3. The light, it's right out the beginning, the word. God will speak the world into existence, the worlds. And the heavens were made by the word of the Lord. Personification of God himself through his spoken word. It's that powerful. That's how it's going to unfold when we ever get there. You gonna say something?
I'm thinking that that this idea of many gods has so infiltrated our lives down through the 2,000 years that we have been since Christ, that it's hard to even carry on a conversation that sticks to the truth that God is the only God.
Yeah. Well, no, we don't, and that's the weird part of it. We're so arrogant about it because we don't believe in many gods. From this world's perspective, we don't believe in many gods.
But to carry on a conversation with other individuals unsaved is difficult because it's so, that idea of many gods has so infiltrated our society and our world and our thoughts that even as Christians, we don't operate like we see,
Right.
or talk or think.
Well, when you're up against the autonomy of the individual, the supreme and sacred autonomy of the individual, across all elements of our culture, from left to right, that's libertarian. Let's just say right-leaning libertarian all the way over to left Marxist. Marxism, well, Marxism, let me leave that. I got to think about that. Forget Marxism. But the autonomy of the individual reigns supreme across that. And it's being, or at least it has, and now it is being overthrown in our postmodernist world.
There you go.
It is being overthrown in favor of group identity. And so now the group that we assign you to defines you as an individual, and that becomes your identity. And you don't choose that. Yes, yes. And there's a set of beliefs and attitudes and practices and speaking that go with that group identity. And if we don't see you upholding that group identity, then we will come after you. So if you're a black person, if you're a black person in the public domain who doesn't conform to what is considered by our culture to be his assigned group identity, he will be viciously attacked for not doing that. Called all kinds of names. I've seen it over and over and over again. Some of these people, one of them's on the Supreme Court, because they don't conform to the group identity that's been assigned to them, usually by white people. I'm just saying, that's my observation. But anyway, we're getting close to politics there. Although to me it's culture. To me, it's culture. Politics is downstream of culture, and I like to stick with the culture. I think that's fair.
There is no, to those individuals in the postmodernistic world, there is no such thing as truth. And the truth, what is wishy-washy, is determined by the group that you're in. They are the ones that decide what's right and what's wrong. Example, this, current movement on, gender.
Yes.
That,
Well, they're creating whole new group identities
yeah.
with the
and
gender
that-
issue, right?
In the beginning, in Genesis chapter 3, that God created man, male and female created them. And they're taking that, ripping it right out of scripture and putting in.
Yeah, in our culture, the war against God, in a sense, is coming to some kind of, we're reaching the point where you can't get more warrior-like against God than where we're heading, because we've already gone through the war against him as creator since 1859 with the publication of Darwin's Origin of Species. There's your war against the creator. There's the sacred Bible of, even though that book has been debunked, even by evolutionists. But that was definitive. The creator has been overthrown. And now, just walk your way through Genesis chapter 1. He created them male and female, he created them. However, he says that.
Created he them.
There's two kinds. He and her, right? She and him. And so the pronoun thing is right out, it's like a war against that verse at the end of Genesis 1. You put your pronouns, it's almost as if my brother just sent me an email like this. Do I have it? Anyway, his company is all into this stuff. Although that's the war against DEI's war against society, and now is now reversed itself, and there's now a war going on against DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So there's a backlash happening. But the head of these people like to put their pronouns after their names, and so he has he, him. This guy sent an email with his little name at the bottom, and then after his name, the guy put after his name, he, him, his preferred pronouns. And so people are responding to him with, he said one of his friends put his name, he responded to the email, his name, me, we, or something like that. I have a friend who responds with he, her, or he, her, yeah, just nonsense. But this is it. When I see those pronouns, he, him, that to me is a war against all the way back to, we've already been at war with marriage. That's chapter 2. We've already been at war with that. We went to war with the creator, and now we're going right back in our anthropology and our understanding of humanity. We're going right back to this dichotomy between male and this partnership, or I don't know however you want to think of that, as a split that is complementary. There's a word for that. Male and female, and the war is there. So you can hardly get more in a war with Genesis chapter 1 than where we've come through in the last 150 years or so. And the gender thing to me is a part of that. They never would have dealt with this back in, this has nothing to do with Egypt, which means you probably shouldn't be talking about it, but it does our culture. If you're asking how does Genesis 1 interact with our culture, what is the interplay? Here's another area where it will interplay in this question of evolution and gender and marriage, chapter 2. So we'll talk about those.
So it all comes down to one thing. I'm gonna reject God.
Yes.
It basically, everything
Yes.
that our society does now is because they don't want to believe in God. They don't want to
Yes.
accept God. They don't want to accept that he's the creator, that he's total in charge of this whole world. I mean, it's just like Darwin. Before Darwin died, he says, I just made this up because I didn't want to believe in God. But society had already taken it and ran with it, and they just ignored what he said before he died.
Yeah, he's an interesting case because
I made this up.
his thinking evolved.
I want to believe that the guy created the heavens and the earth. And it's the same with all society even today. They rejected God. They don't want to believe in God, that God exists. And so they come up with all these other theories and all these other ways of how we're supposed to do things.
If you want an exercise, take Romans chapter 1 and rewrite it for our time. And just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to, Tom mentioned the 3 God gave them over to, and then change it to just reflect our culture. And it works. I don't know what that would, maybe I'll try that this week and just rewrite it.
So basically, you know, like you mentioned about the kings of Israel, they did what was right in their own eyes, and that's what society today must do.
And the end result looks like Romans chapter 1, after this part, through the end of verse 31, filled with all unrighteousness, and then there's this list. The end of the day, the list looks the same. The behaviors, we haven't come anywhere. The list looks exactly the same. 18 is where the wrath part starts.
Romans chapter 1 contains these words. They did not, I just have to recognize him as God or
Acknowledge him as God, yeah.
And that's where we are. They live life totally absent of anything that has to do with the true God.
What's funny is I can talk about this stuff all day and I don't get views. But if I bring up Romans
I
10
think
and
you
free
do.
will, I get views from
I think
people come in from outside and say, I totally disagree with this, but this stuff, huh?
I think we need help.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm
Carry
perfectly
on.
willing to, acknowledge that. Anyway, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. How, Paul, are you going to get out of this? The firstborn of all creation. That sounds like you're saying that he's of the creation, Paul. What are you talking? How are you going to get out of this, Hebrew, Jew, steeped in Moses and monotheism and, right thinking about God? For by him, here's how you're going to do it. Back to the creator. For by him all things were created, both in the heavens and on the earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authority, all things have been created through him and for him. You might as well finish it with John chapter 1. And apart from him, nothing has come to be that has come to be. He is before all things. Somehow he is the firstborn of all creation. How is he the firstborn of all creation? What does Paul mean by that? Read my mind.
It's important. It's priority. That's
What is he the prototype of? What is he the first of? What happened to him first? That there will be a whole bunch more that will follow. Something happened to him after the cross.
Rose or dead.
Resurrected from the dead. He is the firstborn. He is the prototype of a new kind of human, the resurrected human.
Amen.
That's what makes him the firstborn.
Old things have passed away.
But he is the creator and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So that close identity of Jesus with the creator, and you get right back to Genesis chapter 1. Let's go to a different author. Hebrews chapter 1. God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers and the prophets in many portions and in many ways, in these last days, has spoken to us in his Son, or a Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, king, through whom also he made the world. He is the radiance of his glory and the exact representation of his nature, and upholds all things by his powerful word. There it is again, the all-powerful word of God. Genesis chapter 1, verse 3 and following. That's Hebrews. So we'll close out with a few observations about, well, we beat this. We didn't beat this to death, but we did a pretty good number on it. Let's see.
Your Colossians, I got a different verse. Colossians 2:13 and 17.
Oh, I got the wrong one. Shame on the rest of you for not catching it. Huh? Okay, that's verse 1. Did we work it over pretty good? Yeah, we did. And we could go on for another year, but Genesis chapter 1, verse 1.
Genesis chapter 1, verse 1.
Got 2 minutes to go, and I'm going to use it by introducing the next verse. The earth was now in distinction from the God who is over the heavens and the earth. There's some debate about whether the first verse is an introductory statement. Is it an act of creation or simply an introductory statement? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and this is the manner in which he did it. And then we proceed with creation. Or did he create something, the heavens and the earth, and then he went about fashioning it?
Well, the word means, not finished in its shape.
Yeah, the second part-
Uninhabited, that's what that.
Yeah,
word
so it implies that he did something. In verse 1, he created a lump, he did something, and then he went to work. And we're gonna have to we'll deal with those questions in a bit, but the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. And so you get this tremendous sense of anticipation. The Creator is now gonna do his real work of design or something. Like he's gonna show his true genius as he takes this world of chaos and he turns it into something. And by the end of the chapter, he will be able to say it was very good. That's how the chapter is going to end. So we will talk about, this is kind of complicated, but this is a little schema of what's going to happen here. There's a physical ordering of things and a moral ordering of things. We talked about this last week. The man and his wife were naked and not ashamed. You know, you have this pristine environment, both morally and physically, at the end of chapter 2, and then bad things are going to go happen. And so the blue is the physical ordering until the flood, when it drops off a cliff to ruined in chapter 7. It's ruined. But the moral entropy is the principle it's actually a scientific principle that I've taken over here. But closed systems tend towards disorder unless work is done on the system to keep it ordered. And you can see this play out all over the place. Look at that parking lot right there with all the weeds and everything. There's entropy. So somebody does something, which might mean resurfacing. Your lawn, same thing. I got a weed service that comes in and they take care of it and it keeps it ordered. Leave it alone, my driveway, my house, you know, things tend toward disorder, not just in a scientific sense, but as a principle of life. And so that happens morally as well. You see it begin in chapter 3 until it reaches some kind of ruin morally in chapter 6, where that will be that great statement, God was sorry that he had made man. Every intent of the thought of his heart was only evil continually. Ruin. And the moral ruin precedes the physical ruin. And in fact, will be the cause of the causative element. Why did God ruin his creation that he just ordered? Because of the moral ruin of the humans that he created. So he's going to bring that physical element down to the moral ruin as well. And it'll sit there until we come out of the flood. And then we'll see the process start all over again for the moral ruin until chapter 12, when God enters the picture with the promise and he disrupts the effects of the moral ruin as he now begins to call out to create and redeem a people for himself. The moral ruin is still there, but now a new element has entered the game. And that element is God's promise.
I think one thing that helps us with Genesis is if we remember that it was exclusively written for the Jews at
Right.
this time.
Yep. This time being Moses.
Right.
Yep.
This time, and yet the rest of the world didn't have it. And
Right.
It's hard for us to understand that, being that it's public worldwide.
Nobody else knows. This is insider information. Nobody else knows this. They're all just locked in their idolatry over in Canaan. It's not like they got this and had what we consider a
But
fair
God
shake.
came and said, here's an idea.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and shut down. Batterbeast, thank you for joining. I saw Gabe join a little bit ago.
You're welcome. Bye.
All right, I'll see you later.